Good afternoon. I hope you've enjoyed your lunch, and as you can see, our slide has changed. And now it is my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Deb Schoneman. Deb is president of Piper Jaffray. She joined the firm in 1990 in the accounting department and has held several senior management positions throughout her career there, including global head of equities, Chief Financial Officer, Finance Director of both Equity and Fixed Income Capital Markets, and Treasurer. Deb serves on the Allina Health Board and is the chair of the Finance Committee there. She also is on the board of Best Prep, a nonprofit organization focused on business, career, and financial literacy skills. She was awarded CFO of the Year by the Minneapolis-St. Paul Business Journal in 2014. Deb earned a bachelor's degree in finance from Minnesota State University, Mankato, and we are very proud that she earned her MBA from the University of St. Thomas in 1996. So please join me in welcoming Deb Schoneman.
Good afternoon, everyone. Well, thank you, Dr. Sullivan, for the kind introduction and for inviting me to speak today about a couple topics I am very passionate about, trust and authenticity. So a little bit softer topics today. And my goal today is really just to increase your awareness around these two topics a little bit so that you can hopefully interact with individuals in a little different way going forward. As I begin the presentation, I really want to say that I have been extremely blessed to have worked for the same company for my entire career. It's Piper Jaffray. It has been an amazing experience. I will definitely weave some pieces of that into this presentation, but let me just start by giving a quick introduction. Who is Piper Jaffray, in case you don't know the firm that well? So Piper Jaffray is an investment bank and asset management firm. We are a public company with almost $1 billion market cap. And importantly, we have a 124-year history. So we're looking forward to next year and celebrating that 125th. We really talk about the fact that what do? We connect capital with opportunity. And what does that really mean? And we're trying to do that in a way that really builds value and really creates a better future. And so part of this is the companies that we work with. Might be corporations, it might be firms like Allina Health that I'm on the board of, healthcare companies, other nonprofits, and really trying to help them find the capital they need at a reasonable valuation to pursue their goals. So this could be a biotech company who is looking to really continue to pursue curing a debilitating disease. It could be a school district that just passed a bond referendum and now needs to get those bonds placed in the marketplace. Or it could even be a really fun new restaurant concept and they want some capital to expand their idea across the U.S. So that's a big part of what we do, and we support then all of that with robust sales and trading and equities and fixed income securities to support our institutional investors. And we really provide advice with our research analysts and strategic analytics team. So that's a lot about what we do. As a firm, we really value candid advice. You see up there straightforward advice, and it's something that we're known for because what we're really doing is we care more about that relationship over the long term than the transaction itself. We really feel like we win through deep sector expertise, and so that's something that we focus on a lot in really being a market leader where we choose to compete. But what I say about Piper Jaffray, why have I been there for 28 years, almost 29, is really the culture. And I think that's what differentiates us as we look at attracting and retaining people, and it would start with being very entrepreneurial. So when I'll talk about my career in a minute, but when I talk about that, a lot of the roles I had initially didn't even exist at the firm. So I was able to come in, see a need, fill that, and I was given the freedom to create new roles, which was part of why it's been an amazing experience for me. Very focused on partnership mentality, collaboration. We think it's a 1,300 employee firm where we are big enough, but yet small enough to really maintain that collaboration. Really enjoy working with a bunch of intelligent, motivated, hardworking people who teach me something every day. And lastly, I think this might feel a little unique in the financial services industry, but we really value humility in our employees, so trying to put some of those egos aside. And lastly, and this is really importantly, we have over 40 Tommies working for us right now. A number of them I see from Piper in the room. Yes. And we actually have 2 more working on graduate degrees, so that number is going to go up soon. All right, let me just this is really for context. I'm going to give you what will be a fairly brief journey on my 28 years at Piper Jaffray. I started full-time in 1990 after having been an intern there the summer before, and by the time I left my internship, they'd offered me a job, so that sounded really good at the time, although I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I spent those early years really trying to build a finance function, and that's what I was speaking to around trying to create some roles that didn't exist before. And I was just really focused on taking the discipline of finance and really helping the firm and the businesses understand their profitability, creating financial discipline in a very competitive environment. And so I had a lot of actual fun doing that and got to interact with many of the leaders in the different business lines and many of the employees. And I feel during that whole time, I'll say the first, call it 10 plus years, was really building trusted relationships with people. And I'm going to come back to that in a minute. Those people were very much supportive of me and helped me along the way. So as I moved along that path, I think the other things for me that helped were just a natural curiosity, a desire to make things better, to fix things maybe that weren't working as well as they could, and probably a little bit of hard work along the way as well. In 2006, I was asked to step into the treasurer role, and that was the first time when I was really asked to move into a role that I didn't know a lot about, frankly, and I was pushing myself way outside my comfort zone. And I was asked to, create a financial risk management practice. And so all of that was definitely challenging to me. And I started kind of feeling that stress, but stepped into it. And frankly, those trusted relationships that I had built, that's what got me through. They were the ones I could lean on to help when I needed to have a question answered. 2 years later, I was asked to move into the CFO role. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute to give you a perspective about something. But what I would say about when I moved into that role is those trusted relationships themselves were not enough to really drive success for me in that role or to propel me into the other roles that I had that you heard Dr. Sullivan talking about, ending with, in beginning of 2018, president of the firm. So what it really took, I think, and I learned during that time, is it was also going to take confidence and authenticity to really help propel me into those roles. All right, now with all that as context, so let's start out talking a little bit more about trust and building trusted relationships. As I said, when I was on this journey, it was those trusted relationships that I could fall back on to help me that was really important. And it may have even been when we were going through the financial crisis, the head of one of our groups where we were taking a good amount of risk. It was great because he would come to me beforehand and tell me what might happen versus being worried and just hoping that it didn't happen and not have to tell me. And those things are very important in business when you can build that level of trust. So I want to describe for you the 3 aspects of trust that I feel are really important for creating trusted relationships with people. First one is capability. So this is really competence, proficiency, aptitude, and it's something that really, are you showing up in a way with the skills necessary to follow through on the commitments? Are you able to do the task at hand? And again, this could be something with a friend, a client, a coworker. I think these apply across the board. One of the things I think related to capability is just really assessing whether or not you have the capabilities. So if you don't, then what are you going to do? I would suggest another class at St. Thomas would be a fabulous way to get the capabilities. Otherwise, how about asking a question, having lunch with someone to learn more? Example from my journey was when I became the treasurer, and I, again, was not very knowledgeable on the technical side of treasury. I took it upon myself to study for the CTP, Certified Treasury Professional exam, got that designation, just as a way to help me feel like I could be more capable in doing my job. Second aspect of trust is reliability. So this is really about performing consistently. It's about being dependable. It's about what I would say following through on time with your promises, and if that is not possible, to make sure there's open dialogue and communication about that. So often people will let those deadlines slip, and what you're really doing is you're hurting the trust that you have with that person, that relationship. The other thing that I would say is reliability is judged based on past performance, just your historical performance. And so do yourself a favor and don't overpromise on something you can't deliver on, because that's going to hurt reliability. And that's something that I definitely had to learn the hard way, as then I was frantically trying to get something done to hit a deadline, what really was a deadline I just set myself. Okay, the third aspect of trust is sincerity. So when you look up sincerity in the thesaurus, you get words like honest, pure, genuine, true. And I think this is really about aligning what you say publicly with what you say privately. One of the things that I see a lot and can be really harmful is what we'll call triangulation, which I would describe as ultimately sharing frustrations or negative views that you have of someone, sharing that with someone else. And that can just be very harmful and very destructive to building trusted relationships. The other thing I would say about this sincerity is I would tie into it really vulnerability. And I think being vulnerable is one of the strongest trust-building tools that you can have. Really, what do I mean by that? It just means being completely open, sharing frustrations that you might have, some challenges, some struggles where you might have failed, but just being completely open. You find that that will build trust incredibly quickly. Now, I often thought of vulnerability as weakness. Those two were synonymous to me. And what I've learned over time is that actually being able to be vulnerable in building relationships actually takes confidence. Some of you may know Brene Brown. She is an American research professional that has done a ton of work on vulnerability. She's got a couple great TED Talks out there if you ever want to listen to those. But she has this great quote about vulnerability. She says, "The difficult thing is that vulnerability is the first thing I look for in you, but the last thing I'm willing to show you. In you, it's courage and daring. In me, it's weakness." So it's really about the perspective that you hold about being vulnerable. And I will just tell you, I've seen that be so effective in building trusted relationships. Okay, so as I mentioned, those trusted relationships were incredibly important over the years and critical for success, but it was my ability to show up authentically that was really one of the most transformational concepts for me to get my arms around. So let me first describe a situation, an experience I had that will just hopefully help you understand what I mean by the impact of not being authentic. And then I'm actually going to talk about what I think you need to be able to do to show up authentically. So when I moved into the CFO role in 2008, the financial crisis was going on, so it was a bit of a challenge. I felt like it was probably 3 or 4 years earlier than I had actually wanted it to be, so I was already stepping in with a little bit of lack of confidence. So I'd like all of you just to take a minute and think about, okay, what do you think the CFO of a public company should look like? How should they show up every day when they come to work, right? So you have this vision in your head. I'll tell you what I thought that person should look like at the time. I thought that person should really be very driven, all business, little stiff, maybe even a little bit standoffish, no time for chit-chat. Like this is the assessments I had, or the picture I had in my head. I will tell you, though, at the time I didn't actually know that was what was the lens by which I was seeing things through. If you know me, you know that that actually is not me at all. And so what's important to know is that this is going on in my head, not something that I'm consciously thinking about. But for the first, I would say, 18 to 24 months in my role, I just wasn't very happy in the role. And it was very stressful for me, and I actually didn't physically feel that great. And I would beat myself up subconsciously, so I'd go into a meeting and I would maybe think, gosh, I just spent way too much time asking about their kids and what they did this weekend, or it might be I would really listen and realize that I've completely shifted my view and I compromised in this meeting and that I didn't stick to what I believed in going into that. And I was actually subconsciously kind of beating myself up about that. And for me, I felt like I wasn't owning the role of CFO. But at that time, what it meant to me was owning it from a position of power, if you think about this vision that I had in my head. So ultimately, not happy, feeling stressed, wondering why in the world I actually said yes to this role. And one thing that's really interesting as I look back is I had a really hard time controlling my emotions at that time. And ultimately, I just wasn't in alignment internally. We talk about this integrity of internal alignment with who you really are and who you're trying to be. So Thankfully, through some amazing work that our leadership team did with an outside group that helped us come in, and they were really just trying to help us be a more effective team. But to be an effective team, it really starts with each team member. And so we started with self-assessment of who we were, and through that, I really started talking more with some of these trusted relationships about what was going on and how I was feeling, and it became it came out in that, this vision that I had in my head. And the individuals, these peers of mine, really said, Deb, like, you're crazy. Why would you need to be someone that you aren't? Like, you got the role because of who you are. The board, the CEO doesn't expect you to change and be someone different, which interestingly, I don't know why that wasn't obvious to me at the time, but I needed to hear it, and it became very empowering for me. So when I started showing up just more authentically on a daily basis and trying to be more vulnerable as well, I really started being more productive, got invited into more strategic conversations, actually felt better, felt more rewarding with the things that I felt that I was really driving value in doing something important for the company. At the end of that year, I don't remember every performance review I have, although many of them told me that I needed to delegate more, so that I remember. But at this particular one, the CEO said to me, boy, we got some feedback from the board, and it kind of went like this, like, wow, what happened to Deb this year? She really seems to have more confidence and is showing up as more of a leader. And it was that visible in that 1 year, even to the board. And so one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about talking about this, because it really did impact me personally. So what I'd like to do is actually now just talk a little bit more about authenticity and what I think you need to show up authentically. So what is authenticity? So when you think about being authentic, we think about being real, not imitation. At the end of the day, like the actual self. I found this definition, which I thought was perfect. So authenticity is true to one's own personality, spirit, or character. And that's exactly what I'm talking about today. So this is about narrowing that gap between your outside, whether it's your school, work self, and your internal, private, home self, and trying to make those two be as aligned as possible. And I will tell you, as a few years ago, I love taking assessments because now I'm on this self-awareness journey. So I took this assessment, and I didn't actually know what it was trying to measure at the time. And what it was trying to measure is how much your work self, your external self, and your home internal self are aligned. And I was with a group of people doing this, and many of them, you'd look, and there was like these charts that showed how aligned you were, and they were very different. And my charts almost lined up perfectly. And I thought, wow, I have actually achieved what I have been trying to do for a number of years. So I think there are two ingredients to really showing up authentically. The first is what I've been talking about, which is this self-awareness. So you think about what can you be aware of? Lots of things. You can be aware of everything in this room, what's around you in your immediate surroundings. You can be aware of, obviously, feelings and sensations in your body, but you can also be aware of all of these really thoughts and emotions going on in your head. So what drives our awareness? Most of the time, we're actually paying attention to that third category, that's sort of subconscious stream of consciousness that's going on, that mind stream that is really built up with a lot of beliefs and past experiences. And one of the things that I will say is, unfortunately, we're not aware of what we are leaving out when we're making these assessments. How do you become more aware? People say that to me, well, okay, I want to be more aware, but how do I become more aware? Just the fact that you just said that will actually make you more aware, because it's really this stepping back and really thinking about what is it right now that's driving my beliefs or my actions that I'm taking, and ultimately trying to get in touch with those assessments that you're making about any situation. I think it's just this art of kind of stepping outside of yourself and saying, why is it that I'm feeling the way I'm feeling right now? Why is it that this is making me really happy or really frustrated or really curious? And just being able to step back and say, what is it that's going on in my mind right now that's making me think this way? The beauty is that this is one of the best things I learned about awareness is awareness leads to choice, which makes sense, right? If you are not aware of something, there is no way that you can choose to make anything different. And I will just give you a simple example of this. So when I was all along this self-awareness journey that I've been on for probably 10 years, I was working with a coach, and she was trying to help me really identify my values. I'm like, gosh, what's your values? How do you do that? And so she had me journaling, and I don't love to write, so that was a challenge in and of itself. And as she was reading my journals, we started talking about, and she's like, okay, well, you value learning, you value teamwork, you value collaboration, you value honesty. I'm like, yep, that all makes sense. And then she said, you value harmony. And she said the word, and I was like, wow, that really resonates with me, because if I think about it, when I would walk into situations where there were people who were disagreeing, or you could just tell that it was not a harmonious situation, I would actually get worked up about it, and I'd have to try to fix it. I have to try to solve that, and I would step in, sometimes only making things worse. Again, not realizing it at the time. Now that she put this label on it, that I value harmony, when I walk into those situations, I call it my harmony meter now goes off. And when my harmony meter goes off, now I have a choice. I can choose to step in and do something, or I can choose to leave the room, walk away, and you know what? I bet it's going to get all figured out all by itself. And that's just this example of what I mean by once you have an awareness of something, you can actually choose to show up differently. Okay, the second piece is confidence. And this really, I couldn't decide if I should put courage or confidence in this box, because they actually are quite related. But I definitely struggled with confidence. You've heard me talk about that throughout my career, and a lot of it was this little voice in my head saying, gosh, I don't know if you're ready for that role. I don't know if you have the skills, et cetera, et cetera. For me, I've been very lucky to have sponsors in my career who I feel like believed in me more than I maybe believed in myself, and so they would help push me along. That's why I'm very passionate talking about this, though, because not everyone are going to have those sponsors to push them, and so it's really got to come from within to have the confidence to step into different roles. Now, I just want to be clear, this is still something that I struggle with today. So last spring, when Dr. Sullivan called me, I was just talking about this at the table when she said, Deb, would you like to speak at our March 1st Friday lunch? I thought, what in the world? Why does she want me to speak? And then I asked her, what do you want me to talk about? And she said, whatever you'd like, Deb. And she gave me different ideas. And what I've learned to do is to just say yes. So I said yes. And then in December, they said, okay, Deb, we have to start figuring out what you're going to talk about. And so here I am today. So thank you for showing up, because you totally boosted my confidence today. Success, as it turns out, correlates, I feel like, as closely to confidence as it does to competence. At least that is what I have found in my life. And the great news is confidence can actually be learned. I feel like I've really learned it, and part of it came from being able to be willing to fail, or willing to say, what is the worst thing that could happen? And that's one of the things that I'm like, what's the worst thing that can happen when I come up here and speak today? Okay, well, there's only so many people in this room, so even if it's terrible, it's probably not going to be, at least now with social media, I'm not really sure. Things go viral pretty quickly. But just having that mindset, and I will tell you, earlier I said that I was really stepping out of my comfort zone when I moved into that treasurer role. I had a really great friend. It was actually one of those coaches who was working with our leadership team back a number of years ago, and he reframed it for me as, Deb, when you step out of your comfort zone, you're really stepping into your learning zone. That sounds like a much better place to be than out of my comfort zone. And so I have been really trying to take that mindset when something comes up. I have a little quote sitting on my windowsill that said, life begins at the end of your comfort zone. And so really stepping into that has been powerful for me. Okay, let's just pull this all together then. You want to show up authentically. It comes from an awareness of who you are and how people are experiencing you. It comes from being able to just be confident in who you are and step into that. But at the same time, we want to bridge that with ultimately building these relationships based on trust. And you can go so far as to say, yep, I know someone who probably seems pretty self-aware, and boy, they are confident, but I'm not really sure that it's someone that I want to build a trusted relationship with. So what brings those two together, I think, is humility. Ultimately, well, maybe the best way to talk about this, Jim Collins wrote a book, Good to Great. It was written quite a while ago now. Many of you, I'm seeing some head nodding, so you've probably read it. But really just looked at companies that had really achieved greatness, meaning success over long periods of time. And what was different about those companies than companies that were average or good. And one of the things he found was what he called these level 5 leaders. And level 5 leaders were he called it this paradoxical mix of this personal humility but professional will. They were very ambitious, but ambitious more for the company than for themselves. When things went well, they would look out at all of those who helped with that success. When things didn't go well, would look in the mirror. So you kind of get the picture of what these leaders look like. And I really, at the end of the day, label it as humility. And it was very clear that that did drive success in those companies versus the CEOs of the companies that were maybe just good, and there tended to be a lot more ego in the CEOs of those companies. So it really, again, gets to an awareness of how are you showing up. So lastly, why does all this matter? For the sake of what am I so focused on authenticity? And I do think it gets to this whole concept of integrity, which I have here, the state of being whole and undivided. So I talked about this when I was feeling like I needed to be someone who I wasn't. There was that lack of integrity within myself, and didn't know it at the time, but once I was able to connect with that and try to solve that, again, it made everything better for me, including what I noticed, I spoke to this earlier, how I had a real lack of being able to control my emotions. That is much better now than it was back then. So really, that being in alignment is so impactful to you. I guess I just close this, and then we can open up for questions by saying that, I said that I got into the CFO role, and I think I got there by a lot of sponsors really helping me, but at the end of the day, I feel really convinced that it was being able to show up authentically with confidence that allowed me to move into the other roles, including the role that I am in now as president. So I will thank you and stop there and open up for questions. I think there are some mics coming around. Don't make this too easy for me, you guys. There's one.
Thank you, Deb. It's so interesting you talk about your experience when your professional self and your personal self were not in alignment, and you didn't know it at the time, but you felt the struggle. You felt that tension that created for you and a lot of wasted energy. If we were able to, impart one important principle on graduates from St. Thomas, it would be how important it is to be yourself and be authentic. I mean, you had a great piece of advice from somebody who said, look, why would you be anything different than what got you here? And I think there's a lot of pressure on people, especially if they're entering into business or whatever world it is, to try and become something that they have a picture of. They're trying to achieve a certain role or a certain job title, and so they kind of are trying to fit themselves into that. And of course, that's a terrible feeling, especially if you somehow manage to succeed to get into that role and then find out it's totally a misfit. So I'm just wondering if you can comment on how much of that do you think is developing the right mindset and being encouraged to truly be yourself, and how much of that is just experience that you eventually figure some of that out for yourself?
Yeah, great question. And I think I almost would put more emphasis on the mindset, because unless you change that mindset, it's hard for experience to really get you anywhere different. And it's interesting, I think this is a lot about, as we think about inclusion and how to have environments that are more inclusive of many different types of people, it's really important. I had, obviously, our investment bank, if you know that industry, tends to be more of a male-dominated world, and we've really tried to be able to have females come into that. And the other day, last summer, I was having lunch with one of our summer associates. And it was interesting because we're talking, and she says, geez, I just don't feel like I can be myself. I feel like I need to be like the other individuals in that. And the fact that she could actually verbalize that, we had a great conversation, as you can imagine, based on what I just talked about. But it was interesting how she had noticed that struggle. And it again, it had to do more with being able to label it and have the mindset that could drive the awareness driving the choice to change versus really, I think, experience alone. So I'd be more on got to get the mindset shifted. I think we have 2 minutes left, she's telling me. So another question or two? Okay, there's a couple here.
Yeah, so my name is Katie, and I'm an undergraduate here at St. Thomas. And my question before that question was going to be, who are your sponsors, and how did those come into your life? But now, if you want to touch that, that'd be great. But now my question is, based on that, what is Piper Jaffray doing in terms of inclusion to that lunch that you had with one of your associates, and her verbalizing like the
Yeah.
uncomfortability.
Yep. So sponsors, real quick, I will just say they were actually just different men in the organization. I will actually say we have someone on our board right now, Phil Soren, who's sitting right here, who's also been an incredible sponsor for me. So thank you, Phil. I think what we're doing from an inclusion perspective, lots of programs trying to bring students in and have them understand our industry who might not normally know about and come into our industry. So lots of things. But one thing we just did last week is we're really focused on bias. And initially the training that we were going through as leaders was called unconscious bias, because get that. But actually the facilitator said, let's just take unconscious out of it, because some people are using that as an excuse. Oh, it's just my unconscious bias. So let's just call it bias, and let's be trained about that. And at the end of the day, to me, it comes back exact same thing. Awareness leads to choice. If you are aware of the things and the filters and the lenses you have, you can choose to be different. And so we are going to be rolling out some training company-wide around just this whole notion of bias as a way to raise awareness. And I think that's the type of thing that can have the biggest impact. Do we have time for one more? She's given me a 1 minute.
Thank you so much for speaking today. I'm curious about your perspective on how leaders can take their own integrity and translate that into bigger organizational culture.
Wow, that's a tough last question. So what comes to my mind is just leading by example. So leaders of firms, this is something I had to understand over time, that if I'm walking down the hallway with a certain look on my face, people are going to be picking up on that and wondering if it's not good. They're going to wonder what's going on. It might just be that, my daughter's having an issue or something, right? It might have nothing to do, but the way leaders show up definitely influences the rest of the organization. So I think that's the biggest thing we can do, is I can show up as myself. I can talk about it, but, showing up with humility and vulnerability, and then that's going to make it okay for everyone else. So with that, I will close. Thank you.
Thank you, Deb. We are so proud you're a Tommy. And thank you for sharing your own vulnerability and your own journey of self-awareness, and really inspiring us all to build those more trusted relationships and be more authentic. I took lots of notes. And I don't always do that. So thank you very much. This was a really valuable time for all of us. Thank you. And I appreciate that many of our students were in the audience and could benefit from your journey as well. So we are looking forward to our next First Friday. It will be on May 3rd. I will not promise that it will not be snowing, but we will hear from Jim Snee, President and CEO of Hormel Foods, and I hope you'll all be able to join us. Please pick up your parking voucher on the way out, and have a wonderful weekend. Thank you again.